We are live and welcome back to Sports Crunch with DKROM. I'm your host, David Cromwell, but on here, you can call me DKROM. And tonight is the 5th edition of our Dash to the Draft series with the 2016 NFL Draft just 23 days away. Joining the program this evening to break down this year's crop of defensive back prospects, and that means quarterbacks and safeties, is somebody very amazing. Luke Easterling is an NFL Draft guru – insider, whatever you want to call him, on the rise. He currently is on Bleacher Report's elite NFL draft coverage team and also covers the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for Scout.com. And it is with great pleasure to welcome Luke to the show tonight, all the way from Tampa, Florida. Luke, good evening. How are you, my friend?
Doing well, my man. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Thank you so much for coming on the show and lending us your amazing football mind for the evening. It's wholeheartedly appreciated.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on. Glad to do it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And we're obviously impatient for these next 23 days to come and go. But in the meantime, let's talk about this class of defensive backs. And first, briefly, just basically describe your feelings on this year's defensive back class. Is it great, good, fair, poor, etc.?
I think it's pretty unique. I think at both corner and safety, you've got some interesting storylines to follow. I think that from Jalen Ramsey, who in my opinion is the best overall player in this class, regardless of position. I prefer him at safety as opposed to corner. But I think anywhere you put him, he's going to be a playmaker. After that, though, I mean, there's a huge drop-off at the safety spot in particular. I don't have another safety with a first-round grade after Ramsey, which is kind of odd, him being the number one player overall on the board. But that said, at safety, there's a lot of those day two type guys that I really, really like. I'm sure we'll get into some names in a few minutes here, but I really like a lot of those second round, third round type guys at safety. I have a few guys in that range that maybe a lot of people might not, but I'm excited about them. And then at corner, it's interesting because you have two of the top names that have been talked about throughout college football season and into the pre-draft process. It's going to be interesting to see what the NFL values and how certain teams value skill set versus size, because those two guys that I'm talking about, Mackenzie Alexander and Vernon Hargreaves, both 5'10", but our team's going to value their skill sets enough to take them off the board before guys like William Jackson III, who's got the size and the speed and the length that you think of when you think of a number one NFL corner. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the NFL plays that, whether you see a guy like William Jackson come off the board before those other guys because of their size, or whether they're comfortable enough with their lack of size and just think they're good players enough in those other areas. So a lot of fun. I really like the day two corners as well in this draft. I think it's a lot deeper than a lot of people may think. So I like a lot of those guys at both corner and safety that are going to come off the board in the second, third, fourth rounds.
Yes, and you bring up a absolutely tremendous point about skill set against size, and I think that is I was actually talking to myself about that last night, like with especially guys like Vernon Hargreaves, who is under 6 feet tall, and Mackenzie Alexander, as you mentioned, but Hargreaves especially, very feisty player, willing to play the run. He's kind of like Jason Barrett, who's a quietly rising superstar corner, and then some, dare I say. And Barrett lasted all the way until the end of the first round in 2014 due to size, but with the cover corners becoming more of a premium, as the 2013 Seahawks and 2015 Broncos showed, especially guys who can match up with these big, tall receivers, that is definitely going to be a development. I will definitely keep that in mind as I watch draft night and draft weekend unfold. And now you mentioned your first round grades. You said you only had one safety on your first round grades, but how many defensive backs do you have a first grade on, and who are they?
I only have 3 corners, so it's 4 total defensive backs with first round grades. William Jackson is actually the top corner in my on my board. I think that you don't see guys that are 6 foot plus with 4.3 speed, and his arm length, his physicality. He's not as refined of a player technique wise as a guy like Hargreaves. But again, guys with that kind of size and speed, they're going to be able to develop into the kinds of corners that like you said, NFL teams need to do, stand up against those bigger, more physical receivers. So he's the number one corner on my board. I do have first round grades on Mackenzie Alexander and Vernon Hargreaves as well. And I mentioned Ramsey before. So those are the only 4 defensive backs that I feel comfortable putting a first-round grade on in this draft.
Thank you very much for that insight, especially since we're seeing even more than 4 being mocked in the first round. So that'll definitely open my eyes when I read and do more mocks in these final weeks ahead. And one of the names that you mentioned early on is Jalen Ramsey, who you think is hands down the best player in the draft, and for good reason. He has been compared by several scouts and analysts to Tyrann Mathieu, who, in my opinion, was the Defensive Player of the Year last year. My opinion, just the way Mathieu's versatility and his playmaking ability, Ramsey brings those exact same dimensions to whatever team he goes. He can line up corner or safety and make plays all day. And also this Monday, speaking of Jalen Ramsey, Peter King of the MMQB.com confirmed in his column that the Titans, especially if they aren't able to trade down, are seriously considering drafting Jalen Ramsey instead of Laremy Tunsil, which is something many of you in the draft community have been suspecting all along. Do you think the Titans have a case to draft Ramsey number 1 overall if they're unable to trade down? And if so, feel free to make that case even more right now.
Absolutely. I think if you're talking about, obviously the case all along for Tunsil has been he could make a strong case to be the top overall player in the draft. And when you're talking about position, the importance of each position, I don't think you'll find anybody that'll argue that a safety is more important than an offensive tackle, especially a franchise left tackle. I'm not going to argue that either. I think if I was the Titans, I might lean towards Tunsil because I'm trying to protect my investment in Marcus Mariota and moving Taylor Lewan to right tackle where I think he'd be better, and putting a guy like Tunsil, just a rare athlete at tackle, on the left side. I think that for their positional needs might be a better fit. But again, if there's enough of a difference overall, just grade-wise between Ramsey and Tunsil, and not only that, if they feel comfortable with who they could get at tackle at 32 or 33 at the top of the second round, I think their general manager, John Robinson, who spent the last couple of years down here in Tampa as the right-hand man to Jason Light, our general manager down here in Tampa, if he feels comfortable with whether it's a guy like Jason Spriggs, Jack Conklin, any of those guys that could slide to the top of the second round, if he likes that idea better or even thinks he could trade back up into the first round and get that tackle, Jalen Ramsey's his guy. I don't have a problem making that pick.
Yes, indeed. And what's probably going through John Robinson's mind right now, I wouldn't be surprised, is probably what's going through the minds of probably most, if not all GMs in the NFL right now, is that the quality of offensive line play coming into the National Football League is a big mystery nowadays, especially with the proliferation of the spread and spread option-based offenses in college and the lack of teaching proper technique to these offensive linemen. And yes, Tunsil is a freak athlete and he has great potential. But as everybody was going gaga over Greg Robinson 2 years ago, and so far he has absolutely struggled to play up to that potential. So many people are alarmed that that's an alarming trend going on, and that the learning curve for offensive line going from college for the NFL is as steep as it's ever been. So won't you think that is something that John Robinson is thinking? He's thinking, with all this offense, this mystery of offensive linemen, whether or not they're ready to play on day one, Ramsey looks like a more of a sure bet to be ready and make a sudden impact. Do you think he's probably thinking that in his mind right now?
Oh, absolutely. I think for the last probably 10 or 15 years, we've all had this misconception that taking offensive linemen high is some sort of safe pick. Like, that's the safe thing. It's not flashy, it's not sexy, but it sure as hell isn't safe. I mean, look at, like you said, you mentioned Greg Robinson, Lane Johnson, Jason Smith, who went number 2 a number of years ago, also to the Rams. A laundry list of guys, Robert Gallery, who had ended up actually moving into guard and actually being fairly decent. But again, we look, there's so many cautionary tales when it comes to top 10 offensive tackles. It's just as much as a crapshoot as any other position. And you see guys coming out of the middle rounds and being able to be starters. It's so much more complex than just, if I take an offensive lineman, I can plug him in. Look at the guards that went in the top 10 a couple years back. Jonathan Cooper, obviously, there's a knee injury there, but Chance Warmack as well. I mean, there's no such thing as a safe pick. There isn't. And that's something I had to come to a revelation about because I kind of fell into that trap as well for a while. So again, There's no such thing as a safe pick. So if you're going to be, swinging for the fences either way, why not go for a guy like Ramsey who's just going to be a dynamic playmaker all over the defense? Put him in the slot, let him blitz, play corner, play safety. He's going to be all over the place.
He most certainly is. Just like and the way you say it, it makes me think Tyrann Mathieu even more, and that makes me salivate for him wherever he goes, because those types of defensive playmakers in the pass happy NFL are going to get paid probably more than any other defensive backs will ever get paid in history. And now let's move on to our hang on just a second, just got to get my notes up. Another minor glitch here. Forgive me for that little delay, but now we're moving on to the portion of our program I call Buy Sell. And right now I'm going to read you a couple names of certain corners and safeties that have been getting some positive hype in the draft media in recent weeks. And I want to hear whether you buy or sell that hype and why. The first one is a name you just mentioned, William Jackson III. Go ahead.
I'm buying the hype. Again, he's not completely refined in his technique, but I love the explosiveness he has. Again, he's got the arm length. He's 6 feet, 189 pounds, 4'3", 740. Again, that corner position more so than many others, the 40-yard dash really does mean something. You got to have that recovery speed, and it's important for a guy like him. He's going to gamble. He's going to try to make some plays. He loves to close on the ball quickly and can catch himself off guard sometimes and get faked out, but he's got to have that speed to be able to recover, and he does. So he's a big hitter, loves to come down in the run game and mix it up, can get his hands dirty, as I like to say. But I'm buying the hype. Like I said, he's my top corner in this draft, and I would not have a problem seeing him go in the top 15.
Yes, and another guy who's very high on William Jackson III is ESPN's Louis Riddick, himself a former NFL defensive back. So I really value his insights on defensive backs higher than.
Absolutely, we all do.
Yeah, as we should, especially since he played the position. So. And whatever Louis Riddick says, you have to seriously pay attention, folks, especially when it comes to this defensive back class. And another name that has been getting a lot of love is Artie Burns from Miami. Buy or sell?
I'm buying that one too. I wrote a story about Artie about a month ago. And I mean, before you even get to the field, this is a young man that has just he's had to deal with so much adversity over the last 12 to 18. At 44 years old, halfway through the season last year to a heart attack. His dad is in jail. He's got a son of his own already, and then adopted his 2 younger brothers. So he has custody of 3 kids now. He's 20 years old, and to go out and he played basically kind of like a rotational starting role at Miami, still tied for the ACC lead in interceptions with 6. And again, to have all that on your plate as a young man, going to class, playing football at the highest level and playing it well and dealing with those types of things off the field just shows what an amazing mind he has, what an amazing, heart that the young man has to be able to deal with all of that as a person off the field and still be able to execute on the field. It's just a rare quality, and his play on the field backs up the fact that I think he can be a huge asset to an NFL team. He can play corner. I think he could play safety. Again, he's a guy that's still pretty raw also, but the ball skills are ridiculous. There's an interception he had against Nebraska this past year that was it looked like the quarterback was throwing to a receiver. That's the kind of play he made on the ball. So again, when you got a guy that's, again, over 6 feet, he's running in the 4.4s, and you just look at the things he's overcome, that's the kind of guy I want on my football team. He's got a very high second-round grade for me. He's my number 4 corner in this draft. And again, I think actually Mel Kiper mentioned not too long ago that he wouldn't be surprised to see him sneak into the first round. I think he'll probably come off the board in the second, but I would have no problem if he ends up sneaking into the first round. He's a hell of a player and an even more impressive young man.
Absolutely. When I was reading that story on his scouting report, I was just amazed, and that extra spiritual dimension is something that is often missed in scouting, and because
I have the nerve.
What?
What do I have to complain about in life, right?
Right. Oh God, yeah, but it's just that extra dimension that is so underrated, and Artie Burns will definitely bring that to the table to wherever he is fortunate to be drafted. And and last week Notre Dame had their pro day, and a guy who turned heads with his measurables. Forgive me if I butcher this name. Kivare Russell, buying or selling.
He's a guy that, depending on how you feel about him, if you're talking like, day 2, third round type of thing, I'll sell that. I think he's a decent option in the later rounds. He's not as big as you want, but if you're looking for a nickel corner who can, match up in the slot and give you some quickness, I think he's definitely worth a look in those later rounds. I think if you're talking about up in the second, third, fourth round range, there's probably quite a few guys. Tavon Young out of Temple is a slot guy, nickel corner that I like a lot. There's quite a few guys on that list I'd probably take over Russell, but he's a guy that's gotten a lot of buzz throughout his career in Notre Dame, and I feel like a lot of people may think he's kind of underachieved up to this point. So we'll see.
Yes, we shall. And moving on to another name, and your colleague at Bleacher Report, Matt Miller, is really high on this guy. I think he has him currently in the top 50, in his overall top 50. Octavian Howard out of Baylor, buy or sell?
I like Xavier Howard. I don't know if he's a top 50 guy for me right now. When you look at him, obviously the first thing that jumps out is his size. 6'1", over 200 pounds, got really long arms. Those are things that immediately NFL teams are going to raise eyebrows at and be like, okay, we need to see some more of this guy. He's a gambler. He likes to jump on the short routes, can be susceptible to double moves because of that. And again, just a really raw guy. I've also got a second round grade on him, so I feel comfortable with him, but he's not a guy who's going to be right away. He's going to take some time. NFL receivers are going to read the book on him pretty quickly and know that they can set him up with different things, especially the more experienced receivers. So it might take some time for him to grow into his size, grow into his skill set, but there's a lot to like about his game, and I understand why people are high on him. I just probably pull reins back on it for myself a little bit right now, but there's no doubt he has the physical tools to succeed.
Yes, another specimen project, as you mentioned, and those guys are probably going to be overdrafted because of their size. But it'll be interesting to see where he goes and what he'll do. And now moving on to safeties, and this guy Louis Riddick thinks is the most pro-ready defensive back in the NFL draft. Karl Joseph from West Virginia, buying or selling?
I'm buying Karl Joseph. I love him. You want to talk about a violent hitter. That kid, he will light you up. And that's probably why I'm saying nice things about him right now, because I don't want him knocking at my door ready to lay a hit on me. So he's, again, 5'8", but he's over 200 pounds. He's built like a bull. You hate to see the knee injury in his senior season. Just a guy that gave everything to that West Virginia program, and you could tell how much it meant to him. So you hate to see it, kind of end that way for him. But again, I think at full health, he's one of the best defensive backs in this class. And I think, again, I talked about how much I like those day 2 safeties, the second, third round guys. He's definitely at the top, near the top of that list when it comes to second round grades at safety.
Yes, and would it surprise you if Joseph snuck into the back end of the first round if teams are satisfied with his medical rechecks, which are out in, I believe, a week or so?
Yeah, I think anything in the bottom third of the NFL draft in the first round shouldn't really surprise anybody, because you're usually talking about playoff teams who have less, glaring needs, like, oh my God, I have to do this, I have to get this type of position. They're able to move around on the board and go with guys that may not make sense depth chart wise. You look at it like, oh, they don't need a guy like that. Well, a lot of teams at that point that are picking that late, they don't need a whole lot at all. So they can afford to take a guy that they're really in love with at a position that may not look like they need anything, just because they want to have that guy on their team. And Karl Joseph is one of those guys that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yes, and forgive me for asking this, and if you definitely notice my Broncos cap, I don't need to go into Bronco bias or anything like that, but this is just a curious question. If the Broncos are in a position at 31 with multiple options on the table, especially if Paxton Lynch goes in the top 10 or 15, which I personally expect him to, do you think Karl Joseph should be on their list, especially with Darian Stewart coming out of contract and questionable safety depth behind Hitton and TJ Ward?
Absolutely. Why not? Again, when you won because of the defense, it really anchored that whole championship run. So the best teams in the NFL are way less concerned with filling needs and more concerned with getting the best 53 football players they can possibly get their hands on, because again, it's a long season. Injuries are going to happen throughout the entire roster. So if you've got the ability to reload those positions with quality players, you're going to make your team way better than just poking at certain needs and reaching for players that aren't as good.
I absolutely completely agree. Value-based drafting always trumps need-based drafting is a theory that has been proven time and time again. And another guy in the safety position that has been generating a lot of buzz because of his film and because of his measurables, Keanu Neal, buy or sell?
Man, you're picking all my favorites tonight. I love Keanu Neal. Another guy that's just, a violent hitter, just arrives in a hurry, loves contact. He's, needs to probably refine himself as a cover man. Needs to, he's a little lost in space sometimes up in coverage, but very comfortable in the box, can fly around, can cover tight ends man to man. Just really needs to be more comfortable in zone coverage if he wants to be a single high center fielder type guy. But I love safeties who are going to come down in the box and be physical, but are athletic enough to hang with those tight ends. Again, that's really tough to find safeties who can hang physically and athletically with some of these ridiculous athletes we're seeing at tight end. These receivers love Keanu Neal. He's definitely a guy I could see sneak into the first round, particularly to Carolina, right ahead of Denver.
Yes, or he might be on the Broncos board as well. As I mentioned there, both of those teams in need of future investments at that position. And you said I'm picking your favorites, but it might change now. Justin Simmons, Boston College, buy or sell?
I'm buying him too, man. Justin Simmons is a guy I mentioned back about halfway through the college football season as a guy that I thought was really flying under the radar, and I took a lot of crap for saying that I liked him better than Jaron Kearse from Clemson at the time. But I think really you might find it tough to find anybody who feels differently at this point. Simmons was a guy who played pretty well at the Shrine Game practices, which are down here in St. Petersburg. So I got to see him kind of firsthand. And again, great kid, great leader. The ball just happens to find him. When you find defensive backs that the ball just happens to find them playmaking-wise and turnover-wise, is a guy that got his hands in on turnovers, whether it was forced fumbles or interceptions, just very, very often. And again, little skinny, you'd like to see him put some weight on that frame. He played corner a lot this past season and in before, but I think he's definitely a safety at the next level. And I think that it might take some time, but he's really got the physical skills and, more importantly, the intangibles and the mental understanding of coverages and offenses. So I think he'll really succeed at the NFL level.
Yes, and moving right along, many people say Carl Joseph, but he had a teammate at West Virginia named KJ Dillon, who is no slouch himself. Buy or sell?
Absolutely. It's tough for me with Dillon. I like him a lot. I don't think I like him as much as some of my colleagues do who are some of them are higher on him than they are on Carl Joseph. So I still think Joseph is by far the better player. But Dillon's got a lot to like about him too. Again, he's also a guy who's not afraid to hit. He can cover, man, zone. He can really do whatever you want. And again, if we're talking maybe late third, early fourth round, I'm comfortable with that. Whereas Joseph is a guy that I would take again at the top of the second round.
Yes, and some people say that that KJ Dillon could be available in the fifth round, but that obviously depends, and we're not going to know for sure until he gets drafted because this is lying season, as they say. And finally, we conclude buy or sell with a guy who is known for his speed, but after that's kind of a question mark. TJ Green from Clemson, buy or sell?
Yeah, TJ Green, I'm going to go ahead and sell. I think a lot of the hype that we're seeing from him comes from the fact that he had a ridiculous combine. I mean, he comes in at this, great size, raised the vertical. I mean, all these things, just great numbers. But I think he's much more of a combine warrior than when you go back to the film, you kind of see, that he's not the complete player that his combine to believe. So he's not a good player. I'm quite yet to pick. I think he's more of a day three guy, even with those measurables.
I I would completely agree with your assessment there because measurables, as important as they are, can be overrated at times. And it's a mistake, in my opinion, to overrate measurables because it's all about the tape at the end of the day, as they say. And you can't put too much stock in measurables. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, we deal with this every year. There's, workout warriors, as we like to call them, that, will flash the measurables that we all want to see with the size, speed, athleticism combinations and strength and all that. But again, the combine should always drive you back to the tape. It should always make you say, wow, where did I see, why did I not see that before, whether it's good or bad? It should drive you back to that to say, TJ Green runs 4.3 and you're like, damn, he didn't look like a 4.3 guy on tape. Let me go back and see where I can find that. Darian Thompson from Boise State is a great example of the opposite. He went into the combine, ran in the 4.7s, and that was a month after I had seen him in person at the Senior Bowl, and he was one of the best players on the field consistently all week. So you're like, wow, how can he look like this on tape? And then the time speed, it just doesn't match up. So he ran much better at his pro day. There's so many variables when it comes to those measurables. Guys could just be having a bad day. Some guys, maybe just not feeling well. They don't get, explode right off the line on the 40. A career's worth of film should always be worth so much more than a one day in such a controlled, crazy, pressure-packed environment. I just feel like the combine should always drive you back to the tape to see if you can believe what you just saw, in no pads.
Yes. John Ledyard told me the exact same thing on a previous episode, and I completely agree. And we are running out of time, but I just have one more question for you, and that is this. I mentioned at the top of the broadcast the 2013 Seahawks and the 2015 Broncos. The 2013 Seahawks got gems on day 3 in Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor. And the Denver Broncos got a gem in the undrafted free agency market in Chris Harris Jr. All of those guys who were instrumental to those historically elite Super Bowl winning defenses. So my question is, what names are on your radar screen as potential late round gems like rounds 5 through 7 and gems that can be uncovered in the undrafted free agency amongst these defensive backs?
I mentioned Tavon Young earlier out of Temple. He's 5'9", so you're definitely probably limited to the slot with him. But again, he's a feisty, physical corner. I thought he was one of the best corners all week at the Senior Bowl. Really liked the way he just plays a lot bigger than he's listed. You can't tell him he's 5'9" because he just doesn't play like that. He plays way more physically. So I think when you combine that, sorry about that.
Okay.
When you combine that with, you have to be confident to play the position. I think he has the confidence to succeed. DeAndre Hall from Northern Iowa is another guy in the probably 4th or 5th round range. Just we talk about swagger. This guy went up against Braxton Miller at the Senior Bowl a couple of reps and was just in his ear, jawing left and right. Even if he got beat on a play, he was just always yakking about it and coming back the next play even stronger. Big corner, could also play safety, has really long arms, quick guy. And a guy that I've been banging the table for months now, Kevin Byard, safety out of Middle Tennessee State. I feel like people are finally starting to take notice after his pro day the other day. He ran in the 4.4s, 22 reps on the bench, I think a 38-inch vert. Just, a guy I spent a lot of time with in Mobile, and talking to his position coach and defensive coordinator Steve Ellis there at Middle Tennessee. Just a guy they really, really were high on, a great kid. It's just, I think people are starting to catch on now. I have him in the 3rd round. I would take him that high. He's a guy that was not invited to the combine. I thought that was ridiculous, and I think he showed with his pro day performance that he should have been. But that's a guy that I'm going to hang my hat on day 3. If he's still available, I'm jumping up, doing whatever I can to get him on my team.
Thank you very much, Luke, for an insightful evening on these defensive back prospects. And I thank you once again so much for joining us, for lending us your amazing analysis and expertise. He does a great job, ladies and gentlemen, whether on Bleacher Report or Scout.com. Read his work. It'll get you ready for the draft. And Luke, I cannot thank you enough. And I definitely hope to have you on the program sooner rather than later. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, David. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And that does it for tonight's edition of Sports Crunch with DKROM and our Dash of the Draft series. But next Monday, Cecil Lammey from 104.3 The Fan in Denver, and another writer for Bleacher Report will join us for a very exciting edition of Dash to the Draft. For Luke Easterling, I'm David Cromwell. Good evening, everybody. We will see you next week.